Yeah, that was me with a big inhale. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Stratosphere Lounge, episode 97, I guess it is, part 2 of our special show business entertainment Stratosphere Lounge. You know, I cannot remember with life of me. I guess it's got to be Han Solo and not Indiana Jones, but isn't it Han Solo? I'm sorry, isn't it? Yeah, isn't it Han Solo? Yes, it is. It's Han Solo in the Millennium Falcon when it won't start. It's like, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. We had some internet issues again today. You can't explain these things. They just happen. We restarted everything and we're back in business. So it's not my fault. It's not my fault. Anyway, good to be here. Glad to see everybody. And as usual, we have just a couple little things to talk about. I've been doing a lot of interesting work lately. We got a sign of madness upon me. You know what it is when you desire to something, you get the hots for something. Maybe you got a car that you want to buy or a boat or something, and you just, you start obsessing on it a little bit. Oh, a little hot mic, will back it off a little bit. And you start thinking, man, I don't know. I remember when my dad, when we were living on Key Biscayne, my dad wanted to get a boat, and he was telling us we might get a boat. We were probably 10, 11 years old, I guess. And there was a boat for sale, and it was out on the street. And we used to ride past that boat like every day for months. We just ride past the boat, just stare at it, my brother and I. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Anyway, thinking about getting something like that, and I'll tell you about it next week. I should know a lot more about next week. But yeah, been an interesting week because it hasn't really been that interesting a week. We are getting together, kind of an announcement for next week. We're going to start big membership drive and all that other stuff. And along those lines, or somewhat related to those lines, there's always interesting stuff going on behind the scenes between the giant brain trust that actually operates in the back room. They got them just in the back room there. It's about 14 people from the Stratosphere Lounger core group. And I keep them in the... behind the door is actually a basement. It's not really supposed to be a basement. I dug it myself with a pick, and it goes down past the crawl space down below. It's not even, I got a bucket down there, and I throw bits of raw meat, and so the giant Stratosphere Brain Trust is working on interesting things that you may or may not be interested in. And if you want to be a part of that, I'll just put this message out here one more time. Turns out there's a secret code that you can issue and use if you want to be one of the cool kids, and you can send an email to CSR Gifted. That's Charlie Sierra Romeo Golf Indigo Foxtrot Tango Echo Delta CSR Gifted at gmail.com, and on the subject line just put in I'm in. If you send an email to that address and put in I'm in, then you're in. Now, of course, the operating question is what is it that you're in? I don't know. I really don't. I don't have any idea. I don't want to know. Some things like, legislation and sausage making, it's probably just better not to know. I'd love to tell you it's about plausible deniability, but the fact of the matter is I probably don't have the stomach for it. But if you're interested in that kind of thing, definitely csrgifted at gmail.com, and a little subject line that says, I'm in, and then you're in. And then once you're in, and a bunch of you are in, you can email me or Facebook message me or send me a text here in the comment stream at the next Stratosphere Lounge, and you can tell me what it is that you're in, because I'm dying to know. I'm really curious. So we have the entertainment show. We got a late start tonight, as I said, some internet issues, so I think we'll just go ahead and plow through this thing and get through part 2 of this. By the way, as we mentioned before, there's some plans afoot for the 100th episode, episode 100. It's inconceivable to me that people would sit and listen to this for 100 episodes, but never know. Maybe some of you are, in a hospital room, and you've already hit the morphine drip button as many times as you can, and you just in, that kind of bone pain. So maybe you need some help, getting back into your comatose state. So I guess 100 episodes of that are useful. But other than that, it's going to be 100 episodes, and I think we might actually light up the entire room for that. We have a little more space here than it may look. We used to do it from the stage. That should be a dissolve. But from that very stage, hey, everybody, how are you? it's a couch over there, and there's a stage over there. We can do a couple of interviews. We got the big room. We got Captain Kirk, Captain James T. Kirk of the Starship Enterprise right there. And hey, got it, flaunt it, right? So we're thinking about doing a little small private party for some of our closest friends. I know everybody wants to come. I don't know how we're going to limit this. I'm probably going to regret saying that, but I'd love to have the room full of people. I just think it'd be an absolute blast. So, so we got some plans for a 100th episode, and that's going to be fun. And as I say, we're going to be starting pretty soon here with, with a pretty decent size push. We got a fun thing actually coming up because we've got a ebook that we've been working on, and so you guys can be the first one to know. Oh, by the way, before I go any further, Burning Chrome best ad blocker is AdBlock. For those of you who may be new to watching the show live, it's AdBlock, and I think it's getadblock.com. I'm not sure about that. Somebody put it up there, but I'm telling you, they've got it for Safari now. They've got it for Chrome. They've got it for Firefox. And if you install AdBlock, all these pop-up ads that interrupt your enjoyment of the Stratosphere Lounge go away. I was actually thinking I might have to pay thousands of dollars for that, but AdBlock is free, and I can't recommend it highly enough. They're terrific. AdBlock Plus says Modeo. Okay, AdBlock Plus, it's awesome. And I threw the guy some money because the product is really terrific, and I love it. And by the way, it doesn't just work on your Stratosphere Lounge show. If you're tired of seeing pop-up ads and banner ads everywhere, bye now, they're gone. So it's not uncanny, by the way. I'm sure all of you have had that experience. You're searching for something on the web. Let's say you search for like something that you can buy. I was looking for some of these lighting fixtures. What kind of lighting fixtures you're asking? Well, those kind of lighting fixtures right over there. They're pretty cool. Hang on. Those guys, we got a bunch of them here in the Stratosphere Lounge. We got I don't know, 12, 15 of these little track lights. And I went searching for track lights and found them. And then every website I went to for the next, 2 months, here's an ad for track lights. Interested in track lights? Hey, I bet you'd like to buy some track lights. Everywhere I go, more track lights. It's convenient, but mostly it's creepy. I mean to have a word with somebody about this. I may have a word with Google. I may just Google. And I suppose, if you just type it in the search line, it'll get to them, right? I mean, he'll read it. What's his name? The Google guy. Dear, what's his name? I'm very concerned about you. Just type it in the subject line, just hit return, it'll show up right there. But yeah, so 100 episodes, a big deal, and we could have some fun with it. And I know our friend Eisenfire, who guards the secret entrance to the Stratosphere Lounge, which if you're curious and if you're here and if you want to see the big space, the actual secret entrance to the Stratosphere Lounge, right around that way, right around that door. See, the beautiful thing about this, and we have to be very quiet because we don't want anybody to know, is it says utility closet. It says utility closet on it, so nobody will know where we are. That's one means of deterring unwanted intruders. I think probably the more effective means is I've got 2 shotguns taped to the door with a couple of fishing wire things that are connected to the door pull, and there's a little lanyard thing on the outside that I have to release. Otherwise, if you didn't want to come into the Stratosphere Lounge unannounced, then, or I suppose I should say, if you didn't want, 4 barrels of 12 gauge in the face, you probably should have knocked. I'm in a strange mood today. We had some questions coming in live, as you know, at the beginning of the show. Before we get into the questions, we usually just knock things around a little bit. And a couple people are asking about Straticon. And that would be the giant convention, which we really ought to do. And that also is waiting in the wings, among other things that are waiting in the wings. But it's time for the wings to basically spread. So got some good things coming up. I think by next week we can make some big announcements. Anyway, moving on. This is part 2 of the famous show business only edition of the Stratosphere Lounge. And we ended last week talking about the power of story. I've since gone and read a lot of that storybook by James McKay, I think it is. I'm not going to go looking into it. Somebody's going to tell me in a second. I can remember the guy's name. And here's why I can't remember his name. It's the most remarkable thing. This is the best book on screenwriting I've ever read. And it's one of the worst written books I've ever read. He understands the mechanics of story better than anyone I've ever heard of. Not just screenwriting. I mean, he really understands. He's got research going. He quotes Aristotle and goes all the way back. So he's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful person in terms of structure of story. And the book is almost unreadable. I thought that the first time I went through. It's almost unreadable because the guy can't write. He just can't. It's a mess in terms of the structure, which is so ironic. And also, boy, he's such a, typical kind of progressive kind of guy. He always comes up with these kind of scenarios when he's using his own examples. He's fine when he's quoting Casablanca or, Kramer versus Kramer, but when he starts writing his own examples, they're unbelievably hokey and they're unbelievably left-wing kind of, the corporate, evil corporate structure and all the rest. So it's a little hard to get to. Nevertheless, I reread it again, and there's just so many notes in there that are so fantastic. I think primary which is that any scene that starts out either positive or negative and doesn't switch, even if it's a simple thing like you're riding your cab, from one building to another, if the polarity of the emotion on the scene doesn't switch during the scene, then you probably should drop the scene. That's a profound insight, actually. By the way, speaking of scenes, let me show you something here. This is the first act of Big Bad Problems. I had all these things floating around in my head, and the hard part is getting them organized. And Act 1 is especially hard part. Act 1 was the only thing I didn't really fully understand in terms of structure. I knew what had to happen. I knew what scenes needed to be in there, but I had to figure out what scenes in what order. And I've been kind of putting that off, but now it's not put off, so getting that thing done. Really enjoying writing that, actually. Maybe I should disarm the shotguns. The thing about the problem with Act 1 in Big Bad Problems is it's kind of cool. I've got a really cool teaser which is written. Teaser for Act 1 on Big Bad Problems is written. And it's really neat because that first teaser is its own little movie. It's a 5-minute movie. And the only time you can occasionally see it done very well. I don't think it's ever been done better than it has by J.J. Abrams in the 2 Star Trek movies. And I'll bet the Star Wars movie has the exact same thing. The first Star Trek reboot movie with Kirk's father and, fighting that ship and him ramming the ship is a 5-minute movie. It's complete start to finish. It's got a whole cast that doesn't reappear. It's internally consistent. It's a great little story. It's a very moving story. That first story with, turns out the guy who played Thor is playing Kirk's father. It's fantastic. It's a great little mini movie. And I thought, that was nice. I don't know if he'll be able to repeat it. And sure enough, in the second Star Trek movie, Into Darkness, there's a little movie with Kirk and McCoy escaping from the yellow people on the red planet, and Spock trying to disarm the volcano. It's a complete movie. It's a little mini movie from the first frame until where the Enterprise breaks into warp and the titles come up. Complete little movie. So it's a great way to tell a story. And I have your problem with the first act is you got to get some information out there. So it's usually called the teaser or the hook. But I wrote the hook. I like it very, very much. It's a 5-minute mini movie and by itself, utterly complete, utterly relevant. And as with the other 2 movies, it connects with the story downstream. But it's great. And then, so you got a 5-minute mini movie as a hook, and then the whole first act is its own movie because it's basically the first act is Dead getting bitten by one of these mechanical bugs and turning into one of these bats, and it is a movie unto itself. It's a 30-minute horror short, which ends with the plot point at the end of Act 1 and launches our characters into Act 2 and then into Act 3. But if you didn't have Act 2 or 3, you'd still have a great little movie there. And I don't know, structure-wise, I'm as happy with it as anything I've ever done, and concept-wise, I'm as happy with it as I've ever done, anything I've ever done. Little bits of chrome fly into my head every day, little tiny, tiny, tiny little things, and every single one of them is like, that's actually really cool. It's just interesting. It's just chrome. It just gets glued onto the scene, but man, it's cool. Anyway, I'm real excited about that, so that's one of the things we can talk about moving forward here. So let's move on here. The next question that we didn't get to is from Zechariah Tiemans, who says, do you worry about the increasing antiquation of cinematic classics? For example, Most Westerns today are unrecognizable in terms of the modern movie structure, and modern audiences have long since abandoned the relative cheesiness of shows like Star Trek, the original series. I personally think, I don't know, to start a flame war here, I personally think Star Trek, the original series, is a lot less cheesy than Next Generation or any of the other ones, frankly. I think it's a lot cleaner and dramatically a lot better. I was watching Lost in Space again. I thought that was a serious show when I was a kid. That show is designed for kindergartners. I don't know how it got on the air. I don't know how it got on the air. Just the props alone on Lost in Space. Forget Jonathan Harris and Dr. Smith. I don't know how the show made it on a major network. And the first season of Lost in Space was so cool. It was just really a cool space adventure, and immediately just degenerated into this camp. A lot of people point out that Batman had a big influence on it, but I don't know. Anyway, when you look at how badly that show is written and how well Star Trek can be written, the original series is amazing. But so the question goes to antiquation of the genre. And I think that's a really good point. You can make a Western today, but you certainly can't make the kind of Westerns they made in the 40s. You just can't make those kind of movies anymore. Although I want to just grab that and pull it right back and say, I bet you can. It's just that people don't. We talked in the last episode about how one of the reasons the anti-hero became so popular in Hollywood was because the structure of the heroic movies that the anti-hero movies replaced was just so awful. It was just so dull. And that's the worst thing that entertainment can be, is dull. It can be annoying, it can be maddening, it can be so bad it's good, but it can never be dull. If it's just dull, it's awful. And as we said before, Paint Your Wagon and Seven Brides for Seven Brothers and all that nonsense. There was a rebellion against that. And that rebellion is with us today. And because that revolution against the kind of classical 50s Hollywood, boredom fest, you got Paint Your Wagon on one hand and you've got Easy Rider on the other, or Midnight Cowboy, or Dog Day Afternoon, or anything like that, or The Godfather, anti-hero, anti-movie in terms of the traditional values of this country, is a movie about the mafia that certainly doesn't portray them in a good light, but there's no question that Michael Corleone is an anti-hero. Vito, especially when he's played by Robert De Niro in the second movie, is a hero, but not a hero. He's a hero who's a murderer. But it's interesting. It's much more interesting than that Doris Day, Rock Hudson crud. There were great movies made in that time. You look at things like North by Northwest or Psycho or any of that stuff. So it's not like it was all bad, but a lot of it was bad. And we forget how bad a lot of it was. I remember going to the movies as a kid and I have no memory of what I saw at all. None of it. Stuff was just junk. So to answer your question, Zechariah, I think the tone is changing. And yet some films are still pretty timeless. I just glanced up and saw something from PAX 77-1. Singing in the Rain holds up. Casablanca holds up. Wizard of Oz holds up. And a bunch of them do. Citizen Kane holds up. But in the case of like Wizard of Oz, as its own little world, and you're willing to get into that world. Citizen Kane is a dark film in the same way that The Godfather is a dark film. You can almost connect those two films pretty closely. Corruption of power and all that other stuff. So the question is, can you go back to these older forms? I don't think you can go back, but I think you can go forward to the same kind of message. One of the things that McKay wrote about in that book, and I don't think this was his quote, I think it was attributed to somebody else. It might have been attributed to Plato or Aristotle. But somebody said that you have to give your audience what they want. There are a lot of movies that intentionally deprive you of what you want. The ending of The Sopranos is a great example of depriving you of what you want. We're going to let you decide what happened. Okay, but that's not what people want. They want an answer. Does Tony Soprano live or die? We want to know. We've been with him for, 11 years? We'd like to know. But they're not going to let us know. Okay. You can't basically say screw you to your audience. And when George Lucas had his hands on Star Wars, that's all he did. We're going to give you Jar Jar Binks. Everybody hates Jar Jar Binks. Well, too bad for you. He's there. Everybody hates it when, at the end of the movie, when Darth Vader, at the end of the third movie, goes, no! People laughing out loud. And then they start backing in the nose into pre-existing parts of the original trilogy. It's kind of F you to the to his audience. You can't do that. But the point in this book that was so interesting to me was they said the way you should structure a film is you should structure a film so that you give the audience what they want, but not how they were expecting it. That's a profound insight and typical of the genius of this badly written book. It's profound insight. Give the audience what they want, but not in the way they're expecting it. That's what a movie has to do. And a movie that does that succeeds. Because if it gives you what you want in a way that you're expecting it, then why even watch the movie? Of the many profound things, I've been trashing the book for 10 minutes. I'll sing some praises for it. Of the many profound things in that storybook, the book of Story by McKay, I think the most profound insight that he had was that Hollywood thinks that your audience is stupid. That there's just it's good enough. What about this part where this woman lands a Chinese space capsule after jumping from one capsule to another? She's a doctor. She's never flown a capsule before in her life. People aren't going to believe she lands a space capsule. And people in Hollywood go, no, the audience will buy it because they're stupid. They're really very stupid people out there. McKay says, on the contrary, what he says is, how many times have you been in a movie and had the audience already, by the time you're a third of the way through the film, say, that's the bad guy. Even though he's not supposed to be the bad guy, I know that even though he's trying to be like the good guy, we know that the big reversal is going to be he's going to be the bad guy. How many times have you anticipated a reversal in a film? How many times have you seen the big flip ending coming, like a train? Most of the time. And what McKay is saying here is that he's saying what that means is the audience is so smart and they're living in such a heightened state of information processing, even though it's rather passive, that they're able to determine the things that you as a writer have spent 2 years trying to hide. You know that at the end this guy's the best friend is revealed to be the enemy spy. Most people have that figured out in Act 1, buddy. So this is not the way to think of an audience. Not to think of them as stupid. You got to think of them as brilliant, and that is kind of it as far as the structure of things. So give them what they want, but not in a way they expected. So back to the original question. I don't think you can go back and tell stories the way they were told, but I think you can go back to the morals and the messages of older movies and come back to that exact same place in a different way. This goes to how society changes over time and how it's essentially a ratchet. You can't really undo it. I don't know how you would undo it within the same culture. For example, my favorite example of a screenwriting convention is this. I think of all of the entertainment I've seen in my life, I think my favorite single piece of entertainment is Deadwood, the TV Western that was on HBO between about 2003, 2004 or 5, somewhere in there. 3 seasons of the show, and it got a little weaker as it went on. But I just thought that taken as a thing, like Breaking Bad is a thing or Walking Dead is a thing, I thought Deadwood was the best thing I've ever seen. I thought it was the best acted, best written thing I've ever seen. It was very minimally written. I loved it. I thought Al Swearingen is one of the greatest characters ever. And I loved it. I still love it. Now, here's what's interesting about Deadwood, and believe it or not, I do actually have a chance to come back to a point here. In Deadwood is not only one of the most interesting shows I've ever seen, it's without question the most profane show I think ever on television. I think it's the most profane show ever written. They used to have drinking contests for see how many times this certain word would come up and how many times, Al Swearingen would be said in the show. It was incredibly profane show. And after 2 or 3 seasons of this, I saw an interview with David Milch, I think was the guy who did it, and he was asked, I think, a really profound question. His answer blew me away. He said, somebody asked him, he said, this, F word, S word, compound adjectives, is simply the most profane show in the world. And somebody said, did the miners and the people in the town of Deadwood at the time in the 1880s or whatever it is, did they actually speak that way? Is that the actual language that they used? And he said something that just was so deep and so profound to me. He said, no, they did not use these words. They would use words like damn and bastard and, goddamn and things like that. That was the worst language they had. He said, but they used the worst language they had in order to set up a protective shield around themselves to make them seem tougher than they were and to keep other enemies from messing around with them. And he said the essence of what they were doing was they were using the most foul language they could to put a force field around themselves. And he said, therefore, for this to make sense to the modern audience, we can't use the worst language they have. We have to use the worst language we have. And I thought, okay, got it. That's it. And so what you see time and time again, that's why I'm glad we did a show business show, what you see time and time again in theater and the arts and movies that I love and think is appropriate is fatal in the actual world of real politics. And that is the idea that there is a larger truth behind the actual truth. In the real world of politics and science, there is no larger truth. There's no philosophical truth that trumps the actual data. There's no philosophical world of a universe of utopias that trumps what you have to do to try to get there, and you can't get there from here. You can't. It's just wishful thinking in the real world, and we got to fight the idea it's a larger truth. We don't report on Barack Obama because even though this is what he did was wrong or treason or lying, we all know that it's for the larger truth, for the larger good, so we're not going to report on him. That's killing the country in the real world. But that's the nice thing about the theater, and that's the nice thing about working in both these worlds. In show business, the larger truth actually does outweigh the real truth. It's a bigger truth. So the example of Deadwood is so profound to me because if you had seen Deadwood and you'd seen these guys saying, darn it, or you tell that bastard, or damn you, and that was the worst they had, it would sound like a tea party to us. It would say, well, dainty women's tea party. It wouldn't sound real. And by using the worst language we have in order to show that they were using the worst language they had, it does feel real. It feels like a violent, aggressive, dangerous, mean, terrible place where anything can go wrong at any given time. And that's artistic truth. So that's the kind of example I think I would answer you with here, Zechariah. I think if you wanted to tell a story about traditional values, you can, but you can't have the bad guys say, I've got to tinkle now. It just doesn't work. And I said I didn't think there was any way to go backwards, and there isn't. I don't think there's any way to go backwards with the asterisks. Is there any way to go backwards on this? No. Asterisks. In other words, this culture cannot suddenly undo the language. We can't go back to saying, gosh darn it, and heck. We can't. I can't imagine a way in which that would happen. Where's the asterisk? What does the asterisk mean? Well, the asterisk means that we can't go backwards in a culture, but that doesn't mean that you can't have another culture where this kind of thing does in fact reset. And as a matter of fact, I think it doesn't not only possible, I think it's likely. For example, the behaviors of the Romans was appalling. Even by modern standards of Americans, it's appalling. It's not appalling by the standards that people live over the hill in Hollywood. They live it every day. But decadence comes on a society, and as society gets more decadent, it becomes more decadent. And I've never heard of a case of a society becoming undecadent in the long term. But what can happen is that society can collapse down to the boulders and the rubble, and then a new society comes out of that society, and then you start again. You wipe the slate clean. But the problem is the slate gets wiped clean, and we're on the slate right now. So it's a little alarming. But I think it's a really interesting question. Clint Eastwood in Unforgiven made a modern Western that still had a lot of the older Western values. I like that movie very much. And American Sniper is in many ways a very pro-American, well, not in many ways, in every way. It's a pro-American, pro-U.S. military, pro-Iraq war, pro movie. But it's not Sergeant York. It's not Sergeant York. You don't see Chris Kyle riding on a motorcycle and get struck by lightning and have a come to Jesus moment where he crawls into a church in the rain and stands up there and is forgiven. It doesn't happen because people wouldn't buy it. Even though it's a very pro-American movie, he he still has a very dark side to him. You can tell he's suffering, you know. He's suffering a lot. Good question, though. Moving on, Caleb Belchak says, is there a universal story that appeals to every individual? If so, what is it, and how do we harness it? Once again, I'm indebted to McKee in his book. He says that there have been, throughout history, going back to Aristotle, the Greeks, and so on, they could isolate that there were maybe 7 different stories, and then some German guys said, no, there's 36, not 37. You know, and you could say, well, the love story is one, and the redemption story is one, and all these other things, so on and so on and so forth. I don't know how many different stories there are. I bet it's not more than 7, though. I'll bet you every single story ever told is one of 5 or 6. You can make the case, if you get a little loose with your definitions, that there's really only one story. But whether or not you can get everything into this one bucket, I don't really care. I think there's only one story. Let me rephrase that. There's only one story that I'm interested in. And every story that I've ever liked is that story. And it's the story of the hero. It's the journey of the hero. Joseph Conrad described that journey of the hero in a I guess it was an essay or an article he wrote, which we used to do in the planetarium show when I was 13 years old. It's the first time I ever heard this. He talked about the collective unconscious and how various cultures and societies have very similar motifs that go all the way through. And one of the motifs that apparently is every culture in the world throughout time and space has told the same story, and it's the journey of the hero. And that is the story I'm interested in. And after having understood the power of that story, I rewrote Aurora to incorporate this. Big Bad Problems, same thing. It's very easy when you don't understand see, this is the essence of conservative politics too, by the way, right? You go around, this is a happy diversion. I think this might be the only thing in this show that actually has genuine meaning. You go around as a young writer and you think that you're going to just write things. You're just going to write them, and you're going to come up with things, and okay, cool. And you don't have to worry about what's happened in the past. That's old news. You know, you're young and you're new, and you're going to figure it all out. And you're going to do something completely different that's never been done before. Well, there's a 3-act structure in the screenplay, and the first act has to end at 30, and the second act has to end at page 90, and the film has to be done by 120 pages. 3 acts. Not me, man. I'm doing 7 acts, and I'm going to write a 422-page screenplay, and, you know, I'm going to show the world. It's true in life, and it's true in arts as well. Everybody has been somewhere. There's no place you can go where someone hasn't been. Everybody is walking in somebody else's footsteps. And it's probably been true even in the Greeks. They were walking in other people's footsteps. The storytelling is so deeply wired into our human intelligence and our psyches that we don't really understand how primal it is. It's almost like hemoglobin. It's just everywhere, the story structure. But the story I'm interested in is the journey of the hero, and it's in all different cultures. And I think, excuse me, a nasty little tickle cough that I can't shake. I'll give you a couple of examples of the power of this, because this story is the essential story. 3 great examples. I talked about this in that essay I did called Shards. Luke Skywalker is the same character as Aragorn, who's the same character as Arthur, and in slight variations is the same character as Superman. And the classic story of the journey of the hero is this. You start out with a farm boy. If you think about it, Luke Skywalker's a farm boy. He's on a moisture farm. Aragorn is a wandering strider. He's a ranger. He's a guy who sits in the back of a pub. Joseph Campbell. I'm sorry, I think I said Joseph Conrad. Arthur is a page, and Superman's a kid out in the country. Clark Kent, just a boy. So you've got these characters who have no understanding of their uniqueness. They haven't been raised uniquely. They weren't raised as princes. They were raised in very common backgrounds, but each one of them has a yearning. Each one of them suspects that there's something inside them that's not being fulfilled. Each one of them knows that they're not like other people. They don't get along with the rest of the kids. So these characters are called to a quest. They have prior to the inciting incident. The inciting incident is the thing that kicks the story into gear. prior to that happening, there's a certain vague dissatisfaction in their lives. They know something's wrong, but they don't know what it is. They just want to move, and they can't figure it out. And then the inciting incident happens. And so what is the inciting incident? Well, in Star Wars, Luke is a farm boy, and next thing you know, his family's been killed. And 2 pages later, he's in some old man's cabin out in the middle of nowhere, and he sees a princess who's calling for help. And his life is never the same after that. Not only does that send Luke on his journey, but it's what Luke has been waiting for. He doesn't know it, but that's what his entire life has been leading up to. He's been waiting to be called, Aragorn is sitting in a pub, and all of a sudden the ring of power comes into his presence, and he is called to escort and protect that kid. And yet Aragorn is still very conflicted. He's not the king. He's just a ranger. He doesn't want to be king. Clark Kent, is out there, and he's not allowed to run fast, and he's not allowed to throw the football, and he's not allowed to play baseball, he's not allowed to fly, he's not allowed to do any of those things because of the decency of his father. Superman's a slightly different case for a number of reasons. But he's basically alone out there in the middle of nowhere, not aware of who he is or not being able to be who he is, and his inciting incident is his father has a heart attack and dies. And Arthur, of course, is just a page boy, and his inciting incident is he pulls this sword out of the stone. And so what happens is these characters go on this journey, and along the journey they meet allies and adversaries. They meet an adversary of pure evil, Darth Vader or Sauron or Mordred or the rest of the people arrayed against Arthur. And over the course of their journey, they're aided by a certain number of sort of archetypical characters. The wizard is one. The wizard is Gandalf, or the wizard is Obi-Wan Kenobi, or the wizard is Merlin. An old man who was once a warrior is now too old to be a warrior, but his wisdom is still intact, even though his physical strength isn't there. He meets a rogue. In the case, a rogue is somebody who's more of a warrior than he is. He's even a better warrior than our protagonist. He's an expert. He's older. He's more mature. He's more experienced. That rogue character can be Lancelot, or it can be, what's his name? Oh my God, Boromir. Boromir is a mighty warrior, even compared to Strider. He's a mighty warrior, and Lancelot is a mighty warrior, and Han Solo is a mighty warrior. And so these people aid him, and they're tricksters and jesters and all the rest. And they go on this quest, usually to rescue a woman or to rescue something or other, and then they come to the moment of truth. Now, what's interesting about Arthur and Luke and Aragorn is what they are having to do, all three of them, is they have to set right the world that their fathers had screwed up. Arthur's father, Uther, destroyed his kingdom for one night of sex with Arthur's mom, and Arthur is the child of that. Uther Pendragon destroyed his kingdom out of lust. Aragorn's father is actually his great 32 generations before father, but it's essentially his father. His father cut the ring off of Sauron's hand, but did not destroy the ring. He kept it. He kept the power. He chose the power. Uther chose the power. Luke Skywalker's father chose the power and became Darth Vader. So each one of these three young heroes is suffering from seeing the world that they love turned into desolation by the actions of their fathers. And all three of them fear assuming their roles as kings because all three of them are afraid they're going to fail the same test that their fathers failed and make things worse. Aragorn is afraid that if he becomes the king, he will fail at the moment of truth in the way that Isildur failed. And Arthur is afraid that he will fail in the way that Uther failed, and Luke is afraid that he will fail in the way that Anakin failed. And so each one of these three heroes makes a decision to walk away from power at the cost of their own life. Arthur throws Excalibur back into the lake. Aragorn hands the ring back to Frodo and then goes on a suicide mission to give him time. And Luke throws his lightsaber down a pit and says, I'm not going to fight you. I'm a Jedi like my father. You're going to have to kill me. And by walking away from the power, by turning their backs on the power, they do what George Washington did. They turn their backs on power, and by walking away from the power, all three of them suddenly become worthy of the power. That's the test. The test is, do you want ultimate, all-controlling power? All three of their fathers said yes. All three of the sons said no. And by saying no to the power that was offered to them, all three of these sons succeed in a place where all three of the fathers failed, and they then become the actual kings who make the world right again. Arthur becomes the king, even though there's kind of a downturn ending there. Arthur and Arthur's Camelot lives on in people's minds forever, lives on in Avalon. The idea that Camelot existed gets us through the Dark Ages. Aragorn becomes the king. He doesn't just become a powerful warrior, he becomes the king. Boromir saw that he was a king before Aragorn saw that he was himself a king. And of course, Luke Skywalker becomes the king. And the great example in terms of clarity of the power of this story, of the power of the journey of the hero, is Luke Skywalker. And I'll tell you why. It's because, I should, if I was actually sitting behind the console as well as running it, I'd be doing a lot more of these kind of things. The reason that Star Wars is the definitive journey of the hero story, count all three movies as one movie, right? Act 1 is A New Hope. Act 2 is the Empire Strikes Back. Act 3 is the Return of the Jedi. The reason that movie is so profoundly illustrative to talk about is because nowhere else is the journey of the hero as clear as it is in the Star Wars trilogy. Only because Luke is so unbelievably, spectacularly uninteresting. He's such an uninteresting character throughout the first movie. He is just, the whole first movie is him whining, complaining, I want to go to the, why are we doing this? Oh, it hurts. Oh, what happens if I push this button? It's like, no. He's got a goal, but he's incompetent, and he's kind of unformed, and he's a crybaby, and he's soft, and he's weak, and he doesn't know what he wants. So why would we know what he wants? Meanwhile, everybody around Luke in the first movie is crystal clear and interesting. Leia's interesting. She doesn't change. Han doesn't change. Even though you find out he's got a heart of gold, we already knew that. Han doesn't change. Leia doesn't change. The robots don't change. Obi-Wan doesn't change. And Darth Vader surely doesn't change until the very, very end. But Luke changes. The first film, he's a callow youth. By the time you get into Empire Strikes Back, you immediately see that Luke is no longer quite as callow as he used to be. He's not quite the jerk he used to be. In the second movie, Luke goes on a quest of his own free will. He's not forced to go on a quest. Something in him realizes that he can be much bigger than he is. And he goes to Yoda's planet and Dagobah? Anyway, he goes to Yoda's planet and forces himself to humble himself in front of this small creature. And that's the beginning of Luke's transition. That's the beginning of Luke becoming a Jedi, is to put away what he used to think he was and become something else. So Luke goes on this quest in the second movie, and when he's confronted by Darth Vader in the core of the Cloud City, he's basically given a choice of his life. Here's your life. Not only your life, but your life and power versus death. Join me and we'll rule the galaxy as father and son. We'll bring order back to the universe. And Luke looks at this decision and realizes, I am your father. Luke says, he is offering my life and power in exchange for enslaving everyone else. It's better to die than join him. And Luke commits suicide. Nobody really realizes that, but that's exactly what he does. He jumps off of this thing. He doesn't know that there's going to be a ramp down there. Luke commits suicide rather than join his father. That's another act of heroism and humility. It's another choice that Anakin wouldn't have made and didn't make. Finally, in the third movie, Luke is calmer, quieter. He bursts into rage at the climax of all three movies. The climax of all three films is when Luke is having that final fight with Darth Vader and just starts wailing on him because all of the control that he learned from Yoda, all of the control of being a Jedi goes away. He's filled with burning rage and he starts hacking at his father, determined to kill him. And what Luke realizes in that moment is that this is the hatred of the dark side. There's no way to control it. I've been trying to control it all my life. I had all the lessons from Yoda. Doesn't matter. I get filled with such rage and hatred that I'm ready to kill my father, and I'm not going to do it. And the moment, all three Star Wars movies, the moment that those three movies come into focus is the moment that Luke Skywalker turns off that lightsaber, throws it away, and says, I'm not going to join you. I'll never join you. I'm a Jedi like my father. That's what it's all about. That's why it resonates with people. It's why Star Wars is Star Wars and not Ice Pirates. It's not the special effects. People think it's the special effects, but we saw a lot of special effects in the second trilogy, which was utterly ridiculous from top to bottom. Inhuman, robotic, absurd nonsense. Sterile, horrible, worthless dreck. But those first 3 movies were about something. And the reason people love Star Wars is not because of TIE fighters and the Millennium Falcon. People love Star Wars because it's about the things that matter. It's about everybody. The reason, see, now we're into the guts of why it works, not just how it works. The reason the journey of the hero works is because it appeals to everything in everybody. The beautiful thing about the story of the journey of the hero is that the person begins as a farm boy, right? He's a ranger covered in mud. He's a farm boy who's forced to go back and do another year on the farm. He's a page who's designed to carry the armor of obnoxious, arrogant knights and constantly be beaten and humiliated. And the reason this story has the power that it has is because everybody connects to that hero, because everybody on some level feels that spark of divinity inside themselves. Everybody wants to think that they could be a Jedi, that they could be a king, a good king. Everybody wants to think that they could be the person to pull the sword from the stone. Think about that, by the way. Has anyone ever read The Sword in the Stone and heard the legend of Arthur removing Excalibur from this giant boulder and not had the thought, I think I could do it? Everybody thinks they can do it. And I don't think most people think they'd use strength. The people watch that story and they think, could I pull this sword from the stone? The question isn't, could I pull the sword from the stone because am I strong enough? The question is, could I pull the sword from the stone because am I good enough? I used to think about that, pulling a sword from a stone when I was a little kid. I used to think about getting up on my feet and hauling and pulling on it as hard as I can. I think now, if I was confronted with a sword and a stone, I would go up there and I'd grasp the hilt of that sword as gently as I possibly could. I'd just barely touch it. And I'd clear my mind of any ambition or anything, and I would simply clear my mind, and I'd pull as lightly as I could. That'd be the only hope you would have, I think. Who knows? But people start asking themselves that question even though they don't know it, and they want to be Luke Skywalker. You think you want to be Han Solo, and I wanted to be Han Solo in the first movie. I thought Han Solo is 100 times more interesting than Luke. He is. He starts out more interesting, but Luke goes someplace and Han doesn't. Han in movie 3 is no different than Han in movie 1. He's a rogue, he's sexy, he's cool, he's got a bad ride, and all the girls want to be with him, and there's all of that benefit. But when you see the end of the third movie, Luke Skywalker is a king. He's beyond popularity. He's beyond being cool. He's beyond all of these things. It doesn't matter to him anymore. It's a transcendental transformation. So this is the story. And when I was writing Big Bad Problems, I had a, try to find your hero. Who's the hero? And then for a long time, I thought, well, I know who I want the hero to be. But whenever I would tell people the story of this story, he was always the least interesting person. And everybody said, maybe you got the wrong hero. And I thought, no, I got the right guy. The reason he's the least interesting person is because the journey of the hero that person has to start out weak, cowardly, conflicted, soft, desperate, lonely, scared. They have to start that way so that they can go into someplace that isn't that through the arc of the story. They change. No one else changes. That's really important. No one else changes. Lord TO3 there said, referring to pulling the sword out of the stone, the question you'd ask yourself is, can I do it because I'm pure enough? That's exactly correct. Am I pure enough? Am I good enough? Am I good enough to get this sword out of the stone? Because it's not going to take strength. It's going to take purity and goodness. So all of these things hit mystical chords in people. And it doesn't have to be a giant thing, It's this story about the hero and the quest is that you can make the case that, this is what I was saying earlier, that you can get around with the semantics a little bit, but you can make the case that virtually every story ever told is the journey of the hero. The question isn't because do they want to save the kingdom? The question is, what do they want? Do they want a love affair that they missed? Is it, is Sleepless in Seattle the story of the journey of a hero about a man who decides to, go after the thing they want and take the risk? Or is it her story, or whatever? But that's the story I understand. There are other stories, I suppose, but that's the one I understand. This kind of goes to Aloe Constant's next question, which was, how's the development process going in your upcoming movies? They're going really well. I originally thought Big Bad Problem was an ensemble piece. It's not. It's about one guy who joins this ensemble. But it's not their story. It's his story. It has to happen to him. He has to change. He has to start out as a coward. He has to start out conflicted and nervous when other people aren't. And it's not easy to write your protagonist into the mud, but you have to do it. Because if you don't write your protagonist into the mud at the beginning, you can't drag him out of the mud at the end. And if he doesn't get dragged out of the mud, then what have you got? If he starts out muddy and ends muddy, you got a muddy guy. If he starts out golden and pristine and ends golden and pristine, where's the interest in that? The only stories that matter are people who start out dirty and get clean, or people who start out clean and get dirty. Those are the two stories. That's how it works. And you can tell a lot about the person, the writer's core philosophical beliefs by deciding which one of these two stories interests him. I'm not interested in stories about people who end up clean and get dirty. I'm interested in stories about people who start out dirty and get clean. I have a net positive philosophical belief. I believe that people are fundamentally good, and that truth is better than lies. I believe in goodness over evil, and I believe in terms like goodness and evil. I'm not interested in writing anti-heroes or anti-stories, but you do have to understand that to make these things work, you have to start out with a hero who's weak, who commits acts that are not appealing and that are cowardly, and it bothers the audience to see it. And it bothers the audience because it bothers the character too. And that character then carries this guilt and this angst around until the moment of truth appears, when courage is called for, and then if that person shows courage, they're redeemed. It doesn't matter how many times they run away. What matters is, do they stand up when the chips are as down as they get, when it's the ultimate confrontation, where there's nothing going to happen after this scene. This is the end of the movie. The whole movie's been building to this scene. Now this is the moment of truth. Do they run away? That's a story. But it's not the kind of stories I want to tell. Or do they step up? So I rewrote that. I rewrote Aurora to be about a guy. Not about the mission, not about the crew, not about the organization. The first pass on Aurora, which I did 10 years ago, was so interested in the whole idea of going to Jupiter that it was about the company. It was about the mission. And it's not interesting. I mean, it's interesting from a head point of view, but you got nothing to connect to. And it's only after reading this amazing book, this amazing, badly written book, that I started to realize, no, it has to be about a guy. It can be about a woman too. I don't know how to write them as well. You got to make it about somebody, and the audience has to connect with a person. That's your protagonist, whether it's a good person or a bad person. You can have an evil protagonist in an anti-story with an anti-hero, but that's just not for me. I just don't like those kind of endings. I don't like down endings, and I don't like ironic endings. I like up endings. But you can't do Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. It's got to be interesting. They got to suffer, and they got to earn it. They got to work. So that's basically it. And the second movie, which I don't talk about too much these days, although we're getting there, Common Sense Resistance, exact same story. It's about a guy who's lost in the world, who is given an inciting incident. He's asked to infiltrate this Common Sense Resistance. He starts out believing in the big state, starts out believing in the power of the empire, basically. And through a series of climactic adventures where his life is endangered, he comes to realize that that these people who he's been sent to infiltrate are actually better people than the people that sent him. And he turns. He makes a decision. He grows. He becomes more complex. He's not so much interested in the amenities and the trappings of success. He's more interested in friendship and honor and courage and commitment and all those other things, freedom. And he makes the same decisions. And he has weaknesses. And that's how it works. Really. That's really how it works. So I think that's it. Moving on, Isaac Tiemann says, how would things change if the fawning Washington press covered Hollywood and the aggressive Hollywood press covered Washington? Well, we'd be out of the woods, right? We'd have worse movies and better politics. There is still a pretty decent press corps in terms of Variety and Hollywood Reporter that dig into these things. And I have to tell you, while I despise the tone of it, I really can't stand it. I can't stand to watch it. I can't stand the tone of it. I can't stand website, and I can't stand the people that comment on the website and the people that live on this particular website. But TMZ, 30 Mile Zone, is it's doing good work. I think the only reason I don't have a whole lot to say about this particular issue, Isaac, but I'll tell you this: people who haven't spent any time out here cannot imagine how vile this business is. It seems like it's a constant joke, and it seems like everybody makes fun of it, but it doesn't mean it's not true. It's vile in two different ways. It's vile because all businesses, Jeremy pointed this out, he had a lot more experience with this than I do. He basically said that every transaction in Hollywood is sealed with the flesh. That the whole sexual aspect, the whole selling of yourself and all of it is just the handshake that closes the deal. It's astonishing. Name people, who name actors and actresses, usually actresses, who are in relationships fairly well publicized, will basically do just about anything. It's not just that they'll do anything for the part, because they don't really need the part that badly. It's just kind of accepted as the way that the deal is closed. And that's why Hollywood is so preposterously liberal, and why they assume that everybody else is liberal, and why they'll ask you at a table read, we're going to do a table read now, and then after that we're going to start passing around a hat for the Obama campaign. The idea that somebody might be at a table read in Hollywood reading for a movie and not be a giant progressive, it's unimaginable to them. And it's unimaginable to them because so much of what Hollywood does on a daily basis is about, you know what it is? That old saw that you would see with the Indian and the white man would become blood brothers, and they'd get out the big Bowie knife and they'd cut a slice in one guy's hand, the other guy cut a slice in his other hand, and then they'd hold hands, handshake, and their blood is intermingling. That's the idea. I've got your blood in me. I've got my blood is now in you. That's the idea of the kind of blood brothers kind of thing. We've shared blood. Now I have your blood flowing through my veins, and some of my blood's flowing through your veins. And so many of the transactions out here are that. That's what they are. We're going to seal it in the flesh because that way we're all complicit in it together. You really have to understand how this thing works out here. The source of the problem is, and I run into this in my actual job with you guys. It's hard sometimes. The source of the problem is that we are used to buying and selling in this country. Everybody buys and sells something. Even Barack Obama's, community organizer. He's buying prestige and power, and he's selling access to money. That's what he did when he was a community organizer. So everybody's buying and selling something, and in your life you're helping buy or sell something, and that's noble. It's perfectly noble. Trade is what makes all this stuff go around. Trade is what brings us wealth and happiness. I don't have to make everything. Other people will make stuff that I want, and I'll trade them for stuff that I make that I'm good at. Everybody wins. So there's no shame in selling, but the problem with Hollywood and show business is you're the product. What you're selling is you. I'm not selling shoes. I'm not selling transmissions. I'm not selling cars. I'm not selling houses. I'm selling me. And that makes for a number of different problems. For people like me, it makes me unwilling to sell myself. It makes me reluctant to sell me. I'm very, very, very ticklish about selling myself because I don't find it demeaning. I just find it a little rude. I find it, imposing. It's imposing on me. I don't want to go up to people and say, hey, do you like me? Send me money so I can do more of what I'm doing. It just doesn't feel right to me. It's a sign of, just how you're raised. So it is. Ohio Castle said, Coastie rather said, Ohio Coastie says it's like a gang initiation. That's exactly what it is. It's like a gang initiation. You're in now, and now you're in, you can't get out. I try to get out, they keep pulling me back in. That's the way it goes. So in order to successfully sell yourself, the kind of people who succeed in selling themselves are the kind of people who either have or develop or fake a very narcissistic, very aggressive, very arrogant, very, very, very gross, disgusting kind of self-promotion, where it's like, this is the root of when a movie star who's making $50 million a year on a picture has an assistant who might be making, $17,000 a year just for the honor of being with that person. That assistant brings them soy milk instead of almond milk, and then that celebrity throws that thing against the wall, and it explodes, and it says, "You're never going to work in this town again, so oh my God, I'll make sure you know." Where's all this rage coming from? Where's all this? Why are you demeaning this person? Why are you so full of ego that something so small is literally like, it's like a nuclear missile launch? What's wrong with you? Why are you so diseased? Well, they are diseased. They're ego diseased, and they're narcissists, and they're filled with themselves. And one of the reasons that they're filled with themselves, on some level, is because the system forces them to. You have to be, on some level, I think, you have to be. All right. It's not self-confidence. It's much worse than that. It's an aggressive, in-your-face kind of, I'm the best GD actor on the planet, and and everybody else understands that. So you have to be constantly told how great you are, and you have to have all of your immediate whims immediately fulfilled, and everything has to rotate around you. You have to be the center of the universe. Don't worry about that, sweetheart. We got it covered. Oh, they love you out there. They love you. Are you kidding? Oh my God, did you not see the people? Hey, how was it? Was it any good? Oh, they ate you up. Oh my God, really? I thought it was off. No, baby, no. I saw this. I'll tell you this story. I was working as a limo driver in around 1990, 91, 92. It was in the end of my limo driving days, about 92, I guess. We were based in San Marino, which is not far from Pasadena. I got a ride assignment at the Pasadena Playhouse, which is a pretty famous little theater. And normally, these people had a regular limo company, but that company couldn't do it. We mostly drove businessmen to and from the airport. That's pretty much what we did. We were not a Hollywood, Beverly Hills limo company that drove a lot of stars. But one of those companies had a problem, and they subcontracted it out to us. So I arrive at Pasadena Playhouse, and I pick up these two actors, and you probably know both of them. One of them is Meredith Baxter Birney, who was, I forget the name of that damn show with Michael J. Fox. She played the mom on that Michael J. Fox show. And the other was an actor who I like a lot named Dan Hedaya. Dan Hedaya is an actor, a character actor who has been in Buckaroo Banzai and been in a lot of different things. You know him if you saw him. So Dan Hedaya and Meredith Baxter Birney get in the back of this Lincoln Town car. Not a word to me. I'm literally the depth of this personal conversation they had is another form of contempt on their part, because they were talking about very deep personal issues. They were a couple at the time, and I might as well not been there. There was no divider or anything. It's a Lincoln Town car. I was just a prop, like an ashtray, as far as they were concerned. But she got into the car, and he closed the door. She closed her door. And I'm not exaggerating now. From Pasadena to her home in Beverly Hills was at least 50 minutes at nighttime. And for 50 minutes, it was 50 minutes nonstop. I was terrible. No, baby, you were great. No, I was awful. No, honey, you were great. Everybody loved you. I look like hell. I look like a corpse. No, honey, you look fantastic. Look at all these wrinkles on my face. What wrinkles? I don't see any wrinkles. No, I was just miserable. Everybody hated me. Baby, you were great. Didn't you hear the applause at the end of Act 1? Oh, well, that was just a reflex. It was, if you'd had 5 minutes of this, you would have wanted to throw her out of the car. But 50 minutes of it, 50 minutes. So this is a famous person, especially at the time in 1990. It's a famous, good-looking person who'd been on David Loves, Bridget Loves, whatever. Bridget Loves Bernie. She was well known. Just the insecurity, just the sucking black hole of need. And poor Dan Hedaya is just shoveling coal into this thing as fast as he can, And there's no way you can ever, family ties, thanks, Walgus. You can never, ever fill this hole, ever. This person is just a black hole of need and insecurity, and his job was to constantly feed this furnace that'll never be fed ever. What a miserable experience. And I've known people like that. And so you throw in that kind of narcissism and that kind of resentment and that kind of desire, because that's the thing about the movie business. People who want to be in it will do anything. They'll do anything. The only other time I've seen something like that is in aviation, where I've seen pilots would do just about anything. I know when I was taking helicopter lessons before I got my glider rating, I had a couple of helicopter lessons. Thought, oh man, maybe I can, I'm a limo driver, maybe I can be a helicopter pilot. The guy explained to me that professional helicopter pilots flying Jet Rangers, doing document drops and stuff like this, were making $18,000 a year. What? Yeah. Why? Because everybody wants to be one. And the market is such a buyer's market that people were working for nothing. They would literally pay you. They would pay you to fly helicopters so they could build up the hours, they get a better job. And it's like that sometimes in aviation. Sometimes there's a glut of pilots, and when that happens, it gets ugly out there in terms of suppressing salaries. But like actors, pilots have to fly. They have to. It's not like this is my job, or I work here, or maybe I could work there. This is what I have to do. I have to fly. It's a primal need, and I'll do anything. And I got both of those bugs, right? I got to make movies, and I got to fly. And they're not inexpensive hobbies or occupations, either one of them. So when you have that kind of desire, people do anything. And when I mean anything, I mean they'll do anything. Not saying everybody will do anything, but I'm saying a lot of people do things that you would be amazed at. And I'll tell you one other little story with no names attached. I had a friend who was working on a movie as a kind of an assistant and got to be pretty close with this actress. You know, because the actress was depending on her, and they were kind of doing the whole sister thing. And, you know, it's got one famous person and one civilian, basically. And they were on location, and this famous actress had a well-publicized relationship with another famous actor, and they were madly in love. And out on location, she started to have an affair with either one of the actors or the director or something, and a fairly public affair. And the assistant, thinking they were friends because she'd been told they were friends forever, said, you know, listen, I'm just saying this as your friend. Is this something you really want to do? You really seem to be really in love with what's his name, and he's really crazy about you, and it seems so good for you. And by the way, there are people out there with cameras, you know. This could go south. And this celebrity just turned into this snarling mask and said, don't you ever, ever, ever tell me how to run my professional life. Right? It's business, baby. It's business. Business. Yep. So there's that whole aspect of it. Now, coupled to that aspect of the narcissism and the ego and everything, and the fact that you're the product, added to this, you have something else. You have got the most corrupt, illegal accounting and financing in the history of the world. I mean, people who are trading camels in a bazaar in Casablanca would blush if they heard some of the deals that were being made in Hollywood. And certainly any accounting practice on any other business in the country, you'd be in jail for the kind of things that happen with movies all the time. I talked about that before. I'm not going to bore you with it again, but Ed Norton was on the first episode of Sunday Morning Shootout, and I will bore you with it again. He was sitting there with the person who was the director of the studio that did Fight Club. I forget his name now. Roth, I think. And Peter Guber asked a question saying, hey, how are the DVDs doing on Fight Club? And the studio exec goes, man, they're great. They're selling like hotcakes. And Ed Norton turns to him and says, oh, really? And instantly the backpedaling starts. Well, when like hotcakes, I mean, you know, we're still significantly in the red. We got a lot of, you know, the market's really soft, but they're doing better than we thought. We hope, you know, someday we might be able to get out of this hole. And Guber just immediately starts laughing and says, looks like somebody owes somebody a paycheck. And they did. But the point I'm trying to make is, here's Ed Norton, an A-list actor in Fight Club, an A-list movie that made a fortune. It was a big worldwide hit. And he was promised a back end of the DVD sales, and right there in front of our eyes, we realized that he wasn't getting a penny from DVD sales because he had been told that there was no profit from DVD sales. And the way the accounting is done with cross-collateralization, all the rest of it, there was no profit. Here's your balance sheet, Ed. Yeah, can I start seeing my DVD royalties from Fight Club? No, we don't have any sales. We're still deep in the red, buddy. We're still trying to get our investors out. You know, we're still $60 million in the hole. Until the guy, in a moment of false security, talking with his friend Peter Guber, answers a question honestly. Yeah, they're doing great. I mean by great, when I say great, I mean terrible. It's a small example of what goes on all the time. And one of the reasons movies cost so much is everybody has to get paid up front because there is no back end because everybody's a liar. So it's not fun. And back to the question, Isaac, about the press corps, the press kind of glories in this, the Hollywood press. TMZ, which I mentioned a minute or 10 or 20 or 30 minutes ago, shines a light on this kind of behavior. They do it in a paparazzi kind of way. I don't particularly like it, and I certainly don't like the TV show, but they're calling these people out. And papers like The Hollywood Reporter and especially Variety do look at things like this movie was supposed to cost $60 million. It cost $120 million. It's on the books for $60. Everybody knows it's not $60. What happened to the other $60 million? So anyway, back with part two. So let's move on to our next question. John Guy has a question, and I like this one a lot. He says, I'm an aspiring writer, filmmaker trying to write my first feature. I have several ideas for movies with strong conservative themes, but I don't want to end up just preaching to the choir. Do you have any suggestions on how to get the point across and still avoid making a message movie? I guess I do. I think, well, first of all, read this storybook I would tell you about. It's really super good. I think I said earlier that you should give the audience what they want, but not in the way they expect. And one of the reasons that films end up falling flat, especially when they perceive to be message movies, is because all of the dialogue, for example, is on the nose. So, for example, let's say that you want to make a movie and your point is that guns are great. And so you got a guy who's a soldier, or he stops a shootout in a mall in America. Maybe that's the centerpiece of this thing. And your message is that guns are good. Well, if you've got a character who's your main character, and maybe he's the hero of the big gunfight, and he's been saying the whole movie, guns are good. And next thing you know, by happy coincidence, he's in a mall and somebody starts shooting up everybody, and he happens to be armed, and he uses his arms his weapons to overcome the massacre, and at the end of the big shootout, he's got the bad guys on the ground, and he tells the audience once again why guns are great, and then da-da-da, and the curtain comes down, and that's it. That's boring, and it's pointless. The only people that are going to go see that movie are people that already think guns are great, and they're the only ones who are going to stay because everybody else is going to walk out. Nothing happens, nothing changes. Everything's on the nose. There's no reversals. There's no conflict. There's no excitement. There's no challenge. There's no mystery. There's no flip. There's no nothing. It's just, you might as well just read a pamphlet, and you're writing a pamphlet. So how do you fix this? Well, you have to do a bunch of things. You have to make that primary character more interesting. Ideally, that character has to change. Maybe the gunfight happens at the beginning and he changes as a result of what he saw at the gunfight. Maybe he's an anti-gun guy who has something, maybe a smaller incident sets him off, and then he changes his mind and becomes a gun guy. Or maybe there's 100 other different variations on this, but it's got to be powerful. The single one piece of advice you give anybody who's writing a movie is that if you tell something instead of show it, you've failed. Anytime this all I do for a living now is tell people things, when really I'm trying to make the transition into showing them things. So the reason I like Big Bad Problems is because it's a militia. There's 15, 20 people. They're all barking mad. They're crazy individuals. Every one of them is lunatic. One guy's a Napoleonic War reenactor. One guy's a former Navy pilot. One guy's there's guys in a mariachi band. There's a guy who's, they're just nuts. But they're individuals. And they're armed. And they have their own weapons. They have their own technology. They have their own money. And they have their own vehicles. And they're trying to stop the alien invasion while the government tries to kill them. I don't have to basically have a speech about how great guns are. They've got their own guns, and they use their guns to save their own lives and the lives of their friends 3 or 4 times in the course of this movie. I don't have to say that. I just show it. I don't have to talk about how bad the government is because these guys from the government are trying to kill people we like. I don't have to say, government is bad and we should try to avoid large government. We should be, I'm not trying to make fun of you here, John. I'm just mostly making fun of myself because I've suffered from this in a big way. And ultimately what you have to do is, the final thing that's really important, this is the most important thing, is you have to make your villain believable, consistent, and logical. The classic example of this is such a cliche, but it's true. Adolf Hitler never woke up. Never once. Not one day in his life did Adolf Hitler wake up and go, I want to be the most evil man in history. What can I do to be the most evil man in history? What's the worst thing I can do for myself, my reputation, and my people? He didn't think that way. Adolf Hitler went to his suicide grave in the bunker thinking that he had done great things for the German people, that he was a hero. Adolf Hitler is a hero in the eyes of Adolf Hitler. And when you get right down to it, everybody of any impact in history is a hero in their own eyes. Barack Obama doesn't see himself as a socialist, Muslim-sympathizing communist traitor. Just everybody else thinks of him that way. Well, half the country does. He thinks of himself as a man who's bringing justice to a world of injustice. He thinks America's fundamentally flawed. He thinks it's all a result of colonialism, that we stole all of our wealth, and he thinks that we're hate Muslims and we don't understand Muslims, but he does because he grew up in a Muslim country. So he's going to show these knuckle-driving savages in the country that he represents what's going to happen, and he's doing it for good. He's doing it for the good. He's going to kowtow to Muslims because Muslims are misunderstood in America. He's going to do that net good. He's going to weaken America overseas abroad because America is a force of oppression and evil. That's a good. He's going to consolidate power in Washington because all of these knuckle-dragging Republicans and conservatives are trying to keep power out of his hands, and he can't help people if he doesn't have power, so that's a good. He goes golfing a lot because God knows it's a stressful job being president of the United States, and golfing is a way for him to relax so he can continue to do more good, and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on. And it's true for Hitler, it's true for Stalin. All of these people thought they were doing good. And so if you're going to be honest about this, John, and you want to set up a story about whatever it is you want to talk about, whatever conservative principle you want to talk about, here's what you need. You need a protagonist who is the person who's going to, assuming you want an upbeat ending, and it's pretty much given. You need a protagonist who's going to represent your views, and you need an antagonist who's going to represent the views opposing you and your views. But here's the trick. You're going to want to make your protagonist sterling silver and all-knowing and noble and powerful and invincible and going to win all the time. And you're going to want your villain to be mean-spirited, nasty, unsympathetic, unbelievable, and so on and so on and so on. And now I'm going to give you the money here. You must reverse those two impulses. You must make your protagonist weak, vulnerable, conflicted, starting out not a person that you like. You need to make them maybe not as attractive as you would like. You need to make your protagonist dirty. Conversely, the person whose viewpoints who repulse you, you need to make that person attractive, elegant, powerful, logical, and clear. And they need to be acting out of what is seen to be the public good. And most people should sympathize with this guy. You should be sympathetic to your villain. You should at the very least understand how he works. And you think, well, why would I do that? Well, because if you don't have a story. You've got an all-powerful, noble man defeating an awful, shriveled, ugly force of evil who basically issues the greatest single soliloquy in the history of the world and explains to the audience why these principles are eternal and powerful. And nobody cares, and it's just deadly dull. It's an on-the-nose message movie. Nobody wants to see it. If, on the other hand, you have the discipline as a writer and the courage, frankly, as a writer, to say, no, the character who represents me and what I believe is going to be not attractive, and they're going to maybe they're an alcoholic, maybe they have a drug problem, maybe they beat their wives, maybe they're consumed by guilt because they beat their wives, maybe they're an absentee dad, maybe they're broke, maybe they're on drugs. Like I said, they're guilty, they're filled with rage, they're filled with anger, they're lost, maybe they're lonely, maybe they're sad, maybe they do all these awful things. And the person who represents everything that you despise is going to be powerful, attractive, smooth, well-formed, well-thought-out, rational, and regal. If you have the courage and the skill to write your story in such a way that the audience sympathizes with the villain, we need to ban guns for the safety of the people. We're not these knuckle-dragging, people of these sexual connection to firearms. We think that the public needs to be defended by professionals with weapons. We think the idea of running around having your own gun, these people just turn into shooters and shoot up our kids. Of course we need to restrict weapons. It's these nuts with their guns that go out and shoot up our children. Our kids are just trying to go to school and have an education. And it's you people that are making these guns so free and available to everybody. No wonder that people are being murdered. We're just trying to stop the murder. We're trying to protect our children. You write a villain like that, people are going to go, okay, that guy's making a lot of sense. Now you've got a story, because what you're really trying to do, John, is if you say you want to do conservative films, you want to convince your audience that these principles are worth something. But you can't convince them if you assume they agree with you in the first place. You have to show them. You have to show them that the principles work. So, how do you do that? You start with somebody weak and small and maybe unattractive who overcomes inner demons, and then through their actions, not through their speeches, through their actions, at the moment of truth, makes a decision that reveals their inner character to such a degree that people go, I was wrong about that guy. That guy's a brave man. That guy's a good man. That guy's a decent man. That guy's a loving man. American Sniper is filled with this. If Kyle in that movie had been a marble statue, it would have had no power at all. He abandons his wife. He's not a great dad. He's gone along. His resting blood pressure is 200 over 220 over 200 or whatever it was. He would rather be with his friends than come home and get bitched at by his wife. He's a conflicted guy. But the reason he becomes such a terrific hero in American Sniper is because you see that this isolation and this abandonment of his wife is how he copes with what he has to do. He's basically sacrificed his sanity for his family and his country, and his happiness too. And at the end of American Sniper, he redeems himself. He's happy at home with his wife, with the wife and kids. He's happy, and she's happy. Then he steps out to go shooting with a veteran with PTSD. And okay, so it's playing the opposite impulse. It's playing the opposite that makes things interesting, makes your story interesting. And the further down your protagonist starts, the greater his rise will be. The higher up your antagonist starts, the greater their fall will be. It's all about contrast. It's all about contrast. It's all about denying the audience the boredom of thinking they've got it all figured out. That's a really good question, though. A couple more here, and then I'm gonna have to pick up the pace just a little bit because I certainly don't want to do a third one of these. I think we're pretty much getting through this. I can do this one very briefly, I hope. Kevin Jordan says, can anyone even name a progressive hero, one who struggled against actual opposition that wasn't completely consistent with classically conservative views? Challenge extended bill. And related to that, Ray Schneider says, why don't modern movies reflect legitimate moral values anymore, and what can be done about it? I put those two together because the left in Hollywood has a set of moral values that they try to inflict upon the rest of the country. And all of these anti-war Iraq movies were inflicting the leftist view of Iraq on Americans. It's a war for oil fought by murderers and psychopaths. And Redacted made $25,000 total American theatrical gross. I made $27,000 for first weekend of opening up a published book called Silent America, because I was speaking to Americans as they are, and Brian De Palma, A-list Hollywood director, was speaking to Americans the way he wanted them to be. He was talking down to them and giving them his opinion, which is diseased. It's a diseased opinion. But I think the much deeper issue is storytelling is about heroes, and it's about individual heroes. When we say individual hero, you're a conservative. Right? That's it. We talk about conservatives, liberals, we talk about Republicans and Democrats, we talk about all these terms, but really there's only there's a difference of opinion on one issue. Is the collective more important than the individual, yes or no? Are you an individualist or are you a collectivist? Period. If you believe in subsidized, socialized healthcare, you believe in the collective over the individual. If you believe that people should have the right to get health insurance at their own price or not get it or whatever, you're an individualist. It's pretty simple, really. It's pretty simple. Individualism is very rare, very modern. It's only occurred once in history, in 1776, and it's been a big success, but the collectivists are trying to take the effort and the work of individuals and redistribute it to themselves. Simple. Now, the reason that we are in such good shape is because the idea of a story is about an individual on a quest for their personal desire. Individual, personal desire, you're conservative. And usually in the movies that succeed, it's because that person is in danger against a faceless enemy, or it may have a face on it, but it's usually not just one guy. It's usually a guy representing the government or Spectre or Smersh or whatever. And as I said, I thought one of the best lines I ever came up with spontaneously was, James Bond does not go on a mission armed with a strongly worded letter from the United Nations, and he doesn't leave the scene of the casino to chase the murderer in a Prius driving away at a sensible speed. And that's a problem for progressives, because they believe in Priuses and driving at sensible speeds, and they don't believe that people should have guns. But they can't tell a story like that, because you can't tell a story like that. You don't ever have a story where the world is in danger and a coalition of housewives dressed in pink take a petition to Hitler and say, we want you to stop. And Hitler goes, wow, I never realized how evil I was until I was confronted with your pure moral authority. That doesn't happen. Those stories get laughed out of court, and they should get laughed out of court. I frankly just as I was saying it, I'd like to have a scene where a group of mothers and housewives dressed in shocking pink go up to an Adolf Hitler with a strongly worded letter, and I would only like that scene to be the very first scene in the movie because, as you say, sometimes you have to show people how the monster works. That's why the red shirts are the red shirts on the next gen on Star Trek, the original series. That's why when you beam down and you're going to a planet and the landing party consists of Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and you, Mr. Security Guard, chances are pretty good you're going to be there to show the audience how the monster works. Now think about it. How many times does that happen on Star Trek? How does the monster work? We got to kill somebody to show us how the monster works. We can't kill Kirk to show us how the monster works. We got to kill some spear carrier. Oh, it's a giant, salt vampire, or it's an energy cloud, or it's this, or it's that, or it's whatever it is. Somebody's got to die to show us how the monster works. And anyway, the collective doesn't do anything heroic because they can't, because it doesn't take any individual risk. And so the short form is, Kevin, there are no progressive heroes because progressivism is not heroic. That's as pithy as it's going to get. I'm going to just move on right now. Matt Hindelang says or asks, does the use of laugh tracks annoy you? Being a geek, I could be a target audience for Big Bang Theory, but all I hear is this constant laugh track. Can't its humor stand on its own? I've never liked Seinfeld, but the overuse of the laugh track makes me dislike it even more. They just stick out to me. It's an interesting little hair we're going to split here, but I can't speak about Seinfeld. I'm virtually positive this is the case. I will speak about Cheers because I wrote 4 spec scripts for Cheers. I was at several tapings of Cheers. I was being groomed to write a script for Cheers, and then the show stopped. It was time to go. I worked pretty closely with the writing staff, which when I say pretty closely, I meant to say I have a couple meetings with them for an hour or two talking about story ideas, and they were very kind to me and the nicest, gracious, lovely people, all of them. I had a friend at college who went on to become executive producer of Cheers named Fief Sutton. And so let me tell you how it works with an actual comedy. Cheers does not have a laugh track. I Love Lucy has a laugh track. Gilligan's Island, you know what? I don't think I Love Lucy had a laugh track, actually. Gilligan's Island, without question, had a laugh track. So let's take Gilligan's Island. Gilligan's Island has a laugh track. I Dream of Jeannie had a laugh track, and Bewitched had a laugh track. A laugh track, technically speaking, is canned laughter, and it's people and you got all these different variations and tones and levels of laughter. And those shows are shot in a studio with a one-camera setup, and it's like shooting a little movie. And then when it's edited, he says the joke, and Major Nelson says, "Jeannie, I thought I told you to get back in the bottle, but Master, there was vinegar in there." And the laugh track appears. Now, the reason those don't work and seem awful and contrived and terrible is because those were not particularly funny jokes, and the laugh track came in to tell you, to cue you that it's funny. I'm going to get to the point of this in a minute. Cheers, on the other hand, did not have a laugh track. Cheers was shot in front of a live audience, which means that while there was a lot of laughter in Cheers, it wasn't artificial laughter. It wasn't canned laughter. It was actual laughter responding to the actual jokes in real time. And we'll divert a little bit because I always thought this was pretty cool. The modern situation comedy was invented by a man, a really brilliant man. He invented it out of whole cloth. I think he probably did it on some level because he needed to keep the cost down, but the main reason he did it was he understood that that the comic genius he was working with was so effective that instead of a canned laugh track like on Leave It to Beaver, for example, he thought that her performance was so good that people would be able to react to it in real time, and furthermore, he knew that her timing was so exquisite that she needed an audience to play off of, and the longer they laughed, the more she could hold an expression, and the bigger the laugh would get. And that genius was named Desi Arnaz. Desi Arnaz invented the multi-camera situation comedy film before a live audience. He invented it for I Love Lucy. He realized that Lucille Ball was such a magician in terms of her timing that in order to really get her at her best, he had to put her in front of an audience, and she had to get into that feedback loop that exists between an actor and its audience, or a musician and its audience, or a comic and its audience. And he knew that if he could get her in front of a live crowd, people would laugh, and that laughter would make her better than she would have been, far better, far, far, far better than she would have been if she were just shooting this in a studio like Leave It to Beaver. So Desi Arnaz invented the 4-camera or 3-camera sitcom. And basically, it is filmed in front of a live audience. And it's a combination of theater and television. Never been done before, ever. No one had even conceived of it. They had theater plays where people would laugh in real time, and you'd run the show start to finish. Boom, boom, boom. It's a play. Little break for scenery, change the furniture, but it's a play. And of course, there was television and movies, which is broken down into atoms. We're now going to shoot all the bedroom scenes. Then we're going to shoot all of the outdoor scenes. We're going to shoot all of the kitchen scenes. We'll fix it in the editing room. And then when it's edited, when the laughs come up, we'll put canned laughter in there to tell people when to laugh. Desi Arnaz said, no, there's a middle ground here, and we got to find it. And he invented the multicam situation comedy. And it's brilliant. The I Love Lucy, in many ways, certainly far older. It's at least 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 years older than Gilligan's Island, but holds up much better than Gilligan's Island. You can still watch I Love Lucy, because even though I Love Lucy was set in the 50s, Lucille Ball is so good. Her timing is so correct. It's so authentic. That's the word. It's real. No one's telling you to laugh by putting in a bigger laugh track and even a bigger one when the second stale joke comes along. I Love Lucy was shot in front of a live audience, and people reacted to her the way we react to her watching TV. Now, the reason there's a laugh track at all, to be honest with you, Matt, is because they've done studies, and you can do it yourself. You can occasionally see it. If you watched Cheers or Big Bang Theory or I Love Lucy, you watch any of these shows and the laugh track isn't there, it's dead as a doorknob. It's just flat. Because now your brain is telling you, not only the purpose of a canned laugh track was to train you to laugh and to tell you something's funny even though you maybe thought it wasn't. Well, everybody's laughing, maybe it's a little funnier. If you run Gilligan's Island without the laugh track, it's like a funeral service, because it's just not that funny. But conversely, if you were to run Cheers or run I Love Lucy or other excellent comedies without the laugh track, you're training your audience not to laugh. That was funny. Well, nobody wants to be the only person laughing in a room, right? You don't want to be, ha, and everybody looks at you. It's an inbred reaction. People don't like to stand out. Social proof is we do what everybody else is doing. Social proof is the greatest single motivator in human psychology. It's what people do. People would rather be doing what other people are doing than conform to their own most deeply held core belief systems, proven time and time again. You may feel like, maybe you think that something, like maybe you should stand for this person on a bus and, but nobody else is standing, so you don't. You follow the herd. It's natural. It's the way it is. So a laugh track is designed to get the social proof on the side of the comedian or on the side of the producers. Even though there was nobody here laughing at the time we shot it, here's a joke. We know it's a joke because it's got an exclamation point at the end of it. Therefore, we're going to put in a big swell of laughter there to teach you that everybody else is laughing. You should be laughing too. Conversely, if you take the laugh track out of a situation that's funny, you want to laugh, but no one else is laughing. You can't hear anybody else laughing, so you don't laugh. So you be quiet, and it's not funny anymore. But the genius was this recorded, it's a technical term for it is usually live to tape. Live to tape, that doesn't make any sense. It makes perfect sense. We're shooting it live, but we do it on tape. Now, when you go to a shooting of a sitcom, which I highly recommend, by the way, what you'll find is they will do the show more or less in sequence, and then they'll get through the scene, then there'll be a break, and I mean a quick break, because you can't let the audience get cold. And by the way, speaking of the audience get cold, before when you go to tape Cheers, you go into a series of bleachers, you and 300 people, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. And before the show starts and before the cast comes out, a comedian comes out there and does jokes for half an hour because he wants you loose. It's a warm-up act. He warms you up, gets you used to the idea that you're going to be laughing now. So by the time the show starts, you're already in a good mood, having fun, you're laughing, and so on. So I will give you 2 more little pieces of interesting information that I thought were interesting to me when I went on the set of Cheers in 89, I guess it was 88, 89, as a invited guest, as a potential writer. The first thing that's interesting was told to me by my friend, the producer of Cheers, Fief Sutton. You walk into the room, you walk into the studio, and you see the Cheers bar, and instantly something happens to you. You're just instantly paralyzed in a weird sort of way. It's like, I know this place. I know this place. I watch a show all the time. I know this place. I've been here. I've spent hours and hours and hours of my life in this room, and now I'm actually in the room. It's kind of uncanny. The second thing that hits you is how much smaller it is in the real world. It's just so much smaller. You can't tell you why. It's got to do with camera angles and coverage and so on. But it's like the Cheers set, and it's the Cheers set, but it seems it's like a miniature version of the Cheers set. I never got to the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, but I watched so much Johnny Carson growing up, and I guarantee you, if you walked into the Tonight Show, you would be absolutely astonished at how small that Tonight Show set. I bet it looks like it fit in your closet, in your dining room, or your breakfast nook. It's tiny. So there's that. Now, that's all emotional. That just comes from the sensation of seeing what you've seen on TV so many times. But there was an intellectual kick about Cheers, too. You might get a kick out of this. I got a kick out of it. You may or may not know this, but the bar, Sam's Bar in Cheers, I was told, sits on the exact physical spot on the earth that Lucy's living room was on. It's shot on the same soundstage in the same place. So the physical location that I Love Lucy's living room was on is the exact precise physical location that the bar in Cheers was on. Isn't that cool? It's kind of neat. When he told me that, it's like, my God, not only am I seeing this room I've seen a million times on Cheers, if I take away the bar in my mind and I bring in the crummy living room furniture and then the kind of dividing wall fireplace and Lucy's bedroom's over there and the kitchen's over there, yeah, right here, right on that spot. It's kind of cool. But I'm glad I had a chance to shout out to Desi Arnaz because he didn't get any of the credit Lucy gets and deserves so much of the credit. But Desi Arnaz was a genius. He was an actual genius. And he invented it out of whole cloth. And it's one of the great inventions in entertainment history. It allows us to do comedies. So hope that answers it for you, Matt. They don't annoy me. The only time a laugh track annoys me is when it's a laugh track. It's because a laugh track is a lie. A laugh track is, here's a group of people laughing to something else that we've recorded and that we're going to now put in over this lame joke in order to lie to you to make you think it's funnier than it is. But filmed in front of a live audience is not a lie. Now, one final caveat. Many times you'll find there's a hybrid. And the term that's often used for that hybrid, sometimes this term is used just for putting in a laugh track over something that's shot flat, but sometimes it's used as well. It's called sweetening. And sweetening is when, traditionally sweetening would be you have no laughs at all and you put in the laugh track. That used to be called sweetening. I think a better use of the term sweetening would be to say, we're shooting this in front of a live audience. The audience has a laugh, but maybe there's not quite as much punch to that laugh as we want. So we're going to keep that laugh. We're not going to change it. But overlay on top of that, we're going to put in a little more raucous, a little more, belly laugh, a little bit more, just going to sweeten it up a little bit, punch it up. So I wouldn't be surprised if many shows are filmed in front of a live audience and then have the laugh track sweetened a little bit. Contrarily, I wouldn't be surprised if this was some sort of ethical violation, although the idea of ethics in this town is kind of hilarious. A couple more to go, so let's move on. Cindy Lucin says, why are the younger generations targeted almost exclusively in Hollywood? Shouldn't more attention be given to the generations that pay all the bills? Well, Cindy, older generations pay every bill except for one, and the bill they don't pay is the entertainment bill. You may argue that, yes, Dad is writing the check to the cable company, and you may argue that Dad gave little Billy $20 so that he could go see a movie, but the bottom line is the demand is not coming from the dad, the demand is coming from the kids. Kids go to movies. Adults don't go to movies. I'm a movie buff. I may see 5 movies in a theater a year, 6, 7, something like that. And every time I go to a theater and see a movie, I always say the same thing. I got to do this more often. But I don't. Kids, on the other hand, love going to movies even today. And kids, are the ones that are watching the Hulu and watching Netflix and HBO and all the rest of it. It's generally given that, at least in the movie-going experience, young people are going out on dates. Older people generally don't want the hassle. You get older and, it's like, I got to go to the mall, and God, the prices are $30, $15, $20 per person, and then, the popcorn, this is going to set me back $100, plus there's the parking, and there's never any place to park. We have to walk all this way and stand in line, and I'll just stay here and watch TV. But young people don't care. They don't care about lines. They don't care about the parking. They don't care about the cost. They're not paying the cost. They don't care about the lines because they're chatting with their dates. They don't care about parking because they got energy. They're kids. So the fact is that while the parents may have the money, the kids they're the audience. They drive the demand, and so it's kind of appropriate. Sometimes you can find movies that appeal to older people. There's a term in Hollywood that talks about quadrants. Somebody once broke it down. I actually don't know what the actual quadrants are. I know the term very well. I've heard it all the time, but I don't know what they actually are. Undoubtedly somebody here does. But the urban market, which basically means the black market, is a quadrant. And, an older audience is a quadrant. Young males is a quadrant. Young females is another quadrant. And what Hollywood is looking for is they're looking for the film that hits all the quadrants. They don't want a one-quadrant film. They want a film that appeals to everybody. So you may put something into, you put a classic examples, you put a love story into an action picture, right? You're not really making them, it's not a real love story, right? It's not a real love story. If it turns out the guy's got a cape, but it's enough of a love story so that the girls on the dates with the boys have something they can connect to because they're not into this whole kind of cosmic battle. I just shot, plasma bolts out of my fingertips. So, these things are kind of spliced together in that regard, but you are marketing to teenagers, and it's by far the biggest part of the market, 15 to 20, somewhere in there, 22. That's who I'm making big bad problems for, frankly. And I've got a perfectly good reason for it. I don't want to, I don't think you can. I don't want to. I think it's a waste of time to appeal to the 20-somethings or 30-somethings now that voted for Barack Obama 2 times. They'll still living in their parents' basement. They've been completely socialized to be progressives. They've been completely indoctrinated. I'm not interested in them. I want to make movies for 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds. I want them to look at these conservative principles and not think, oh, conservative principles. I just want them to look, hey, it's cool to have your own guns, cool to have your own cars, cool to be left alone, cool to be unashamed about driving fast, cool to be, it's cool. I want them to look at the things we believe in and go, that's cool. I don't have to preach to them. That's what I do in my day job. I want to show them that it's cool to be armed. It's cool to be free. It's cool to be driving big, fast cars and have, hot chicks and blow away bad guys. If I can do that, then we win elections, presuming that the conservative candidate knows how to articulate that he's in favor of these things, and that's a whole nother argument right there. Was it 4 to go? Hey, Matt Hindeland is back again. Best Bond, movie, actor, girl, theme song, car, gadget. It's all subjective, obviously, but I think the best Bond movie is Goldfinger. I think without question. It's the classic Bond film. The best Bond actor is Sean Connery, closely followed by Daniel Craig, and I'm actually starting to lean towards Daniel Craig. Daniel Craig is a far better actor than any of these other guys. If I had to rate them, I would probably, actually on balance, if I had to rate them, I would see if I can do it. I would probably put Daniel Craig first, Sean Connery a close second. I like Timothy Dalton quite a lot. I'd put him third. I'd put Pierce Brosnan fourth, and then George Lazenby fifth, and far, 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 far down at the bottom, Roger Moore. Roger Moore's James Bond was a prissy kind of a fey, sort of a, old. I just couldn't stand Roger Moore's James Bond. I thought Dalton was really quite good. Didn't particularly care for Lazenby. There's something missing from Lazenby. And Pierce Brosnan's a little too dainty, a little too, little too buffed, little too, not physically buffed, just a little bit too, metrosexual, I think. The reason I think Craig is so good, Craig and Connery are the standout favorites because Craig and Connery had two things, really had one thing that had to be captured in James Bond, and Craig and Connery captured it. Dalton got part of the way there, Lazenby a little bit, and I never really got it out of Pierce Brosnan, and Roger Moore was on the other side of the planet. What James Bond ultimately is he's a killer. He's a killer. He's not a good man. He was not written to be a good man. He's not a hero in the traditional sense of the word. Bond and Craig capture this more than anybody. That's why I rank Craig so highly. Connery glossed it over a little bit, but it was there with Connery. In the first Bond movie, Dr. No, the first time you see James Bond in the first Bond movie, he murders a man in cold blood. He's a killer. He's an assassin for the British Secret Service. He has a license to kill. And when you get into what Bond really was, he was a man with a Walther PPK in the back alleys of East Germany trying to kill a Soviet spy before he was killed by the Soviet spy. That's essentially what James Bond was. And as Bond got more and more successful, the capers got bigger. So so the first Bond movie, Dr. No, is a simple assassination kind of story. The second one, From Russia with Love, is two spies fighting to the death on a train. And then you start getting into, You Only Live Twice, and by the time you get into, maybe afterwards, by the time you get into Goldfinger, you start getting into the kind of classic Bond sort of cliche of it is a supervillain who is going to destroy or take over the entire world. The fate of humanity is in James Bond's hands. And that's where they went with this thing for 20 movies, right? Something like that, 20 movies. And it got worse and worse and worse. You've got Bond on a space station, in Moonraker, and he's dressed in some LeMay kind of thing, and he's floating through space like this, and here come the legions of bad guys. You can tell they're bad guys because they're wearing green jumpsuits, and the good guys are wearing orange jumpsuits. I think you started to see that in Thunderball, actually. That underwater fight scene in Thunderball only could work because you had to have the good guys in orange wetsuits and the bad guys in black wetsuits, because otherwise you couldn't tell them apart. That was a nice little moment. But it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and the bigger it got, the more spectacle and special effects it had in it, the further away from interesting it became, I think, to me, certainly to most people. And this is the whole idea of a reboot, right? When your villain is a guy with nuclear weapons who's going to destroy the world, and the only way that you can save the planet is to hide out in the landing gear of a space shuttle mission, and then take over the orbiting diamond that's going to use its laser to incinerate the Earth, where do you go from there? You can't. You can't keep topping it. There's no. You can only sing so high. And what the Bond movies were doing, they were singing a constantly higher key, and they were singing in that high-pitched screech longer. There was no place to go. Finally, with Casino Royale, they had the good sense to say, we got to stop this. We can't just walk it down because people will be disappointed. We got to just stop it and reboot it. We got to stop it and start again. And so Casino Royale became about a man with a gun who's a murderer fighting other murderers with guns. And a chase scene in a back alley with a Walther PPK is far more interesting than floating through a space station killing 60 villains with your laser pistol, because people can connect to the danger. They can connect to it. They can relate to it. It's touchable. It's something they can get their hands on. That's a really important thing, is this idea of reestablishing the reality of it. And it's a good chance for me to make one little quick point that's not directly related to the Bond thing. But this is the problem with computer graphics. I expect to have some computer graphics in the movie. I expect to have a fair amount of them. But I'm never going to make it look like computer graphics. The classic example of this is this. Let's say you do a scene where a car hits a landmine or something, and it explodes, and a tire comes off the car and goes flying through the air. Now, prior to computer graphics, you would shoot that in a practical way. You'd have a practical car running down a road. There'd be an actual flash pod explosion. Maybe there's a little hydraulic jack or something that jumps the car up, and then the wheel would cut loose because the bolts weren't on it, or maybe it's bolted loose, and the tire would go sailing through the air. And the tire, this is the point now, the tire would come at such an angle so that you'd see the tire coming off, but it wouldn't come right towards the cameraman because it's a real tire, a real car, and if it came right towards the cameraman, it might kill him. So you'd see the tire go flying off into space. And when computer graphics came along, they thought, ooh, we can have the tire miss the lens by an inch. And you've seen this so many times. How many times have you seen fighter jets, CG fighter jets, where the jet passes 6 inches under the camera, like this, And people go, ooh, wow, it's really scary and really cool and really engaging because we got so close. No. It takes people out of the story. They don't know they're being taken out of the story, but they, on some level, realize that, well, it must be a CG jet because you can't get that close to real jets. And this is a subtle point, but I mean to stick to it. So when I do CG in the movie, I'm going to have my CG look like a practical effect. You should never be able to tell it's CG, which means that the angles have to be realistic. It has to be shot like it's a real practical thing. It's just a little point, but it's an important one for bringing people out of the story. And when you get into Moonraker and this kind of nonsense, and, I didn't even see any. I never saw a full version of the Pierce Brosnan Bonds. I just didn't care. And there's a whole episode to be done on me and James Bond when I was a teenager. I mean, I could do a whole episode on just Bond. Maybe we should. It'd be fun. Best Bond movie I think is Goldfinger. Best Bond actor, Craig Connery. I've lost his name now. I've forgotten it. Anyway, I said it earlier. Rewind appropriately. I got his face right in front of me. Then Lazenby, then Brosnan, then Moore, Dalton. Craig, Connery, Dalton, Lazenby, Brosnan, Moore. Maybe flip Brosnan and Dalton, but that's it. Best Bond girl. I don't know. I kind of liked... I don't know. I guess the best Bond girl is going to have to be... Honor Blackman, maybe, in Goldfinger. No, not her. I forget the name of the actress who was sprayed gold. The woman who's been killed by being painted gold so her skin can't breathe and she dies. I'm not sure that's the case, but anyway, that is the iconic Bond image, right? A beautiful woman in a bed, dead, looking like she's made out of gold. That's James Bond. Theme song, Goldfinger, I think. There have been some good theme songs. Skyfall's a really good theme song. Goldfinger's a really good. You know what? You know what my favorite Bond theme song is? You're all gonna laugh out loud. Ha ha ha. My favorite, the only Bond movie theme song that I have on my iPod is the theme from the original Casino Royale, which was a comedy movie and completely off canon. Nobody talks about it, but I think it's done by Sergio Mendes in Brazil '66. I love that theme. I love it. I think it's fantastic. But it doesn't really count. So I guess the best theme song would be Goldfinger's kind of classic. Best car, you got to go with the Aston Martin, right? By the way, in Skyfall, when they bring the Aston Martin out again, oh man, that was a great piece of filmmaking when his old car from Goldfinger comes out and the car becomes a character in Skyfall. The car saves his life in Skyfall. Brilliant. That's brilliant filmmaking. That's when you see the Millennium Falcon again. That's brilliant filmmaking. And Gadget. I'm going to go with the jetpack in Thunderball. I'm sorry, in Goldfinger. When you got to escape from a bunch of guys with guns and you're able to reach down and put a flying device on your back and then just fly off into the sky, that's as good as it gets. That was the age of the jetpack. We had jetpacks in Lost in Space. We had jetpacks in Bond movies. Where's my jetpack? I don't know. I have to tell you, a kid growing up on jetpacks, I wanted one so badly. But when I found out many years later as a grown-up that the jetpack had an endurance of about 30 seconds, that's about all they could really get out of it. Maybe a total fuel burn of, a minute, maybe a little under a minute. You found out that everything was done with very quick shots because that thing could only fly for like a minute or something like that, the classic jetpack. That was a heartbreaker. Let's see. Two to go. Jacob Belchek says, is it possible to turn Hollywood around? No, I don't think you can. I think, I don't know if I talked about this before. I think something tells me we might have gotten that earlier in the last show. But the short form is you can't turn the Titanic around either, Jacob. It's sinking. And you've got you've got a rowboat. The only thing you can do when the Titanic is sinking is you can't change its course. It's too massive. It's moving too fast, and it's too much inertia. What you can do, though, is man the lifeboats and set up a parallel Hollywood, a parallel structure. But I don't think you can turn this around. It's just too corrupt and too evil. It's got to go to the bottom, and it's going to the bottom. The explosion of all these online things like YouTube, Hulu, Netflix means the studios are becoming less and less interesting. The fact that it used to cost millions of dollars to do a movie, now for $10,000 worth of camera and $10,000 worth of computer, you can edit and shoot a feature film. So, there you go. So I don't think so, Jacob. I think you got to start from scratch. I wouldn't mind doing an episode where we talk about people who want to get into show business and what we can do. That might be a story for another day. Finally, Zechariah Tiemans, are you excited for Star Wars Episode 7? I am very excited. I'm not a Star Wars guy. I'm a Star Trek guy. Star Wars never really got into me in the way that Trek did. And you know what's funny? Really, it's funny. It's little things for me that show me great promise. Tiny, tiny, tiny little things. So I'll tell you what I saw on the Star Wars trailer that I liked. There's a couple scenes when they bring the TIE fighters in, and obviously the Falcon comes back, so automatically you're there. But if you look at the scenes that are on the last version of the trailer, the TIE fighters are fighting, and they're going through looks like it's a hulk of an ancient starship or something. And the lasers are very small. When I say small, I mean they look powerful and very bright, but they're not huge glowing white, or red things. Like in the original thing, lasers were optical effects. They weren't computer effects. They were just literally done with exposing things, and so the beams on the starfighters, the beams on the X-wings, and the beams on the TIE fighters were pretty big and pretty glowing. If you look at the beams on the TIE fighters in the trailer, they're very tight. They look real. They look like they're actually really imparting energy, because the beams on the original Star Wars movie were done in 77, I guess, 76, 77, somewhere in there. And they just didn't have the technology. They basically just set up like a glowing line. It's like a glowing line that comes at you. And it's just glowing. It's just a sort of a plasma thing with nothing in it. You look at the lasers on the TIE fighters in the new trailer. Oh, I just blacked out the mic. Sorry about that. I probably saved everybody a burst eardrum. It's kinetic. It looks like it's throwing a lot of energy down there. And the reason I find that impressive is because it means somebody's thinking, somebody's put some thought into it. It looks real. It looks real. So yeah, I'm real excited as I can be for a guy who's not a huge Star Wars fan. But I think it's going to be terrific. And the scene with Han and Chewie, it's obviously inside the Falcon. You can see there's a curved bulkhead. It's in the Falcon. When he says, Chewie, we're home, they're back in the Falcon. I'll make a prediction. I don't have any inside information, but just because I like putting pieces together, in the trailers you see a series of derelict spaceships. There's a crashed X-Wing. There's a crashed Star Destroyer. There's something else that's been crashed. And I think that what that's going to get us is, it looks like it's Tatooine. It looks like it's Luke's original planet. I think what we're going to find out early is that there was a giant battle over Tatooine, and that this is backstory. After the real movies, after Return of the Jedi, but the backstory prior to the Episode 7 is that there was a gigantic battle with TIE fighters and X-Wings and all this other stuff. Maybe it's the moon. I don't know. But anyway, there was a big space battle, and all of these vehicles have crashed. And they're hulks. They're just space hulks. You can see them in the trailer. I think what we're going to find out is that the Millennium Falcon is one of these hulks. I think the story, I'm just guessing, I have absolutely nothing to believe, but I had to guess, I would say that what he's going to do with the Falcon backstory is that the Millennium Falcon has crashed on this planet and has probably been there for quite a while, maybe decades. Thought abandoned, thought it was lost, and they find the Falcon, and it's in tatters. It's not flyable. Not only not flyable, it's probably completely stone cold dead. It's essentially a hulk. And I think Han and Chewie are going to find the Falcon, and they're going to refurbish the Falcon and get her back into flying condition. That's what I think is going to have happen. I think that's it. I think they're going to find the derelict Falcon, and the symbolism for me will be, if I'm right, because the Falcon looks pretty roughed up on the inside on that one glimpse you get in that one shot. But if I were telling the story anyway, what I would do is I would have the Falcon be a derelict and a wreck, and have it be covered with moss or in the desert or corrosion, because by restoring, we know the Falcon flies again because we've seen it. By restoring the Falcon to flight condition, you're making a very good visual metaphor for restoring the franchise to flight condition. In other words, if the Falcon is a hulk, rusted out hulk that's barely flyable, when you see it, it's like, yeah, here's where Star Wars was. It was completely run into the ground by this lunatic George Lucas. It's just appalling for those movies. Those 3 movies were just awful. Some of the worst films ever made. And so you've got this rusted wreckage of what was the greatest franchise in motion picture history. And by bringing Han and Chewie back into the movie, and bringing the original cast back into the movie, by refurbishing the Falcon, you're refurbishing the franchise. That's my piece of cinematic wisdom, and I'm sticking to it. You heard it here, folks. If it turns out that's the case, you heard it here first, because I'd never heard that before. But if I had to bet, that's what I would do. That's good storytelling one way or another. Hopefully it'll be either that or better. I don't think it'll be worse. Anyway, that's about it. I think that'll do it for today. I should have some interesting announcements by next week, as usual. And as always, just, want to say again, couldn't do this without the paying members of BillWhittle.com. Look at this magic land I live in here. Look at my wonderland of a studio I live in. It's Disneyland is what it is. And I owe it all to you. So again, very grateful for all the support, personal support. Again, a lot of people so kind to me, especially when I was feeling quite ill. Doing much better now. Thank you. Thank you for everything, for keeping the lights on and all the rest of it. So that'll do it for part 2 of episode 97, another internet glitch, which I'm going to have to look into. It's been there's no warning. It just goes out. Used to be I'd get bandwidth warnings, but they've just stopped. So we'll take a look at it. But thanks for joining us for Stratosphere Lounge, part 2 of the entertainment edition. And I expect we'll be back next Wednesday with a whole new Stratosphere Lounge, episode 98. That means 99. And then it's time to go, boys and girls. Time to go for the 100th Gala episode. And we're sure to have some fun doing that. So until next time, thank you so much for joining us. And thanks for the support. And be careful out there. We'll see you soon.